There's no do-overs. We're not going anywhere else. We have one particle left each. That's it.
If only Marvel itself had enough Pym particles to travel back in time to change the past. The MCU has definitely become one of our favorite things in life. But that doesn't mean it's perfect, no. Although the franchise is incredible and the Infinity Saga exceeded our highest expectations, there are still moments that you just know Marvel wants to take back, and we get it. With a franchise this big, of course, there are moments that they would want to change. Today's video is all about the biggest mistakes the MCU wishes they could erase, so let's get into it right now. When Iron Man 3 was preparing for release, fans were excited that Tony was about to go up against the biggest villain in his rogues gallery. Superman has Lex Luthor, Batman has the Joker, and Iron Man has the Mandarin. It was a showdown that was teased since the very beginning, with the Ten Rings being introduced as a terrorist organization in the first film, which of course is a clear reference to the villain. But everyone knows the story. In the movie's big twist, the person we thought was the Mandarin was just some washed-up boozy actor named Trevor, and a lot of comic book fans took issue with the change. Sure, it was subversive, but that doesn't mean we didn't want to see the actual Mandarin. And although Marvel backtracked by releasing a short video that suggested the real Mandarin was still out there, we think if given the chance, Marvel would add that reference to the actual movie. Although Captain America got his happy ending at the end of Endgame by traveling to the past and retiring with Peggy, the act raises a lot of questions. Besides breaking and dividing the internet on how time travel works, the move felt especially out of character for Captain America. Sure, he definitely earned his retirement after saving the world for the umpteenth time, but for him to just sit back and do nothing while bad things happen in the past doesn't feel like the Steve Rogers that we've come to know and love. Think of it this way. While Steve was off dancing with Peggy in a love-struck haze, Bucky was being abused and brainwashed to become a mindless assassin, and Hydra would be slowly taking over S.H.I.E.L.D. Does that sound like something Cap would let happen? We should have known something was off when old Cap gave Falcon the shield instead of Bucky. No, we're not still sour over it. Alright, let's just get this out of the way. Time travel is so hard to write about. You have to establish what rules you're playing by and how the mechanics work specifically in your story. There's not just one way to write about time travel, but you have to at least be consistent with the rules you establish about how everything works. Avengers Endgame tried to have their own version of time travel, but ended up creating a lot of confusion by seemingly breaking its own rules to serve up a more emotional story. It doesn't help that the writers and directors can't seem to agree about how exactly time travel works in the film. But with so many alternate timelines and endings, there's a lot to digest about Avengers Endgame. So much that we made an entire 30-minute documentary on it. Oh yeah. When you have to go to that length to understand something, maybe it should have been a little easier to follow. Avengers Endgame is filled with some of the most super of superheroes to ever grace the screen, and although they did some amazing things, none of them really holds a candle to the rat that saved the world. This rat was the key to everything as it ran across the controls of Scott Lang's van and released Ant-Man from the quantum realm at just the right time. But come on, there couldn't have been a slightly better way to get Scott out of the quantum realm other than have a rat accidentally push a button? Wouldn't it have been a little bit easier if we saw Scott figure out a way to free himself using his own wit and knowledge rather than just dumb luck? You think Doctor Strange saw this future as the one where they won and thought, the only future in 14 million that we win is the one where we get lucky with a rat? Although it's sometimes difficult to accept, we Marvel fans have to get used to the fact that some things don't make sense. It's not like every film is written and directed by the same person, so each new movie brings with it a chance to tell a story that fits within that movie, but may contradict things that were established previously. Take Nick Fury's missing eye. It was an event that many fans were dying to know about, only for it to be revealed that he lost it by playing with an alien creature in Captain Marvel. But that creates a plot hole from Winter Soldier, which showed pictures of Fury becoming both Deputy Chief of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Bogota Station and even Director of S.H.I.E.L.D. with both eyes intact. This was obviously changed for Captain Marvel, which saw Fury lose his eye at much earlier time. We now wonder what the original plan was for explaining how the super spy lost his eye. We don't necessarily blame the MCU for having a muddled timeline. We can forgive minor inconsistencies in when certain events take place, but it's kinda hard to defend them when they make huge errors like the timeline issues presented in Civil War and Spider-Man Homecoming. Vision's speech in Civil War is supposed to clarify when things took place, but all it did was raise more questions, and Homecoming was even worse. By placing a title card directly at the beginning of the film that stated Homecoming takes place 8 years after the Avengers, it basically broke Marvel's timeline. Marvel even had to admit that the 8 years thing was wrong, and there are a lot of theories on why this happened. The biggest being Marvel was trying to retcon events by making the kid who Iron Man saved in Iron Man 2 a young Peter Parker. That's what you get for trying to be clever, Marvel. For the longest time, Hawkeye was the butt of everyone's jokes. That's in large part to the poor way Marvel handled the character in his first few appearances in the franchise. We saw a glimpse of Hawkeye in Thor, with the promise that we would get more of him in a later movie, but that turned out to be pretty darn disappointing. The first time we really got to see Hawkeye show his stuff in the Avengers, and he spends a large part of the movie brainwashed by Loki. It was such a disappointing turn for the character that it almost tarnished his entire legacy before it could be corrected. Jeremy Renner was so unhappy that he asked Marvel to kill off Hawkeye so he wouldn't have to do it anymore. The studio has done a lot of course correcting to turn Hawkeye's image around, but that all could have been avoided if they just handled the character better in the Avengers. If you were to analyze the first two Thor movies, you would notice two things. One, the relationship between Thor and Jane is the crux of both of the first two films. And two, why in the heck was Thor's eyebrows bleached? It's weird. But as important as Thor and Jane's relationship was in the early movies, Marvel didn't mind breaking the two characters up off screen in order to give Thor his semi-reboot with Thor Ragnarok. As great as Ragnarok is, it feels so weird to just shove such an important relationship to Thor off to the sidelines and wave it away with a joke about Jane breaking up with Thor. And although it looked like it was the way to write Natalie Portman out of the MCU completely, it was surprising when Marvel announced she would be returning for the fourth Thor movie, which makes their weird off-screen breakup even more baffling. If there's one character that Marvel is probably regretting not finding a way to work into the MCU by now, it's probably Adam Warlock. Casual audiences may not be familiar with him, but any comic book fan knows how important Adam Warlock was to the whole Infinity Gauntlet storyline. But even though he was vital in the original source material, Marvel couldn't figure out a way to introduce him organically. By the time Infinity War was coming around, they couldn't just insert him into the story without it taking away from the characters we already care about. Though we know Adam Warlock is on his way. He was teased at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, so it's clear James Gunn has big plans for the character. Definitely expect to see him sooner rather than later. Now we're always going to be left wondering how Adam would have fit in during the fight against Thanos, and now we'll never know. Remember Lady Sif? We forgive you if your memory was a bit hazy, because she's been gone for oh so long. She was one of the core members of Thor's team in the first two Thor movies, and was positioned as sort of romantic rival to Jane. But when Thor Ragnarok came around, she was nowhere to be found. Behind-the-scenes reports say it was because the actress who plays Sif, Jamie Alexander, was busy filming her NBC television show Blind Spot. But the character wasn't even mentioned in the film or any of the following Avengers movies. It's probably a good thing because she more likely would have been killed off in Thor's threequel. But for her to not even show up in the final battle against Thanos is weird. Marvel better have a good reason for where Sif is, or else it will come across as a huge gaffe on their part. As we mentioned, maybe it was a good thing Lady Sif wasn't in Thor Ragnarok, or else she might have been wiped out just like the rest of Thor's friends. The Warriors 3 were huge parts of the first two Thor movies, and you would be forgiven if you thought they would also play a huge part in Ragnarok, but nope, that certainly is not what happened. Hela came through Asgard like a hurricane and promptly dispatched the Warriors 3 like they were yesterday's trash. Although Hogan got to put up a bit of a fight, Fandral and Volstagg were killed without a chance to really say anything or fight back, which is a huge mistake. We get that Thor Ragnarok had a lot going on, and this was its way of wiping out all ties to the old Thor movies, but it could have been handled a lot better. If there's one thing that Marvel movies love to do, it's make references to its upcoming projects. We're getting to a point where it seems like it's more common to speculate on what's coming next, rather than focusing on the movie at hand. Some of these references work, while others fall a little flat. Take Doctor Strange's name drop in Captain America the Winter Soldier. When it was revealed that Hydra is using Project Insight to target special individuals, Sitwell mentions how it could easily eliminate people who are a threat. He references Bruce Banner and Doctor Strange. Although it's cool that Doctor Strange gets a shout out, he wasn't a major threat at this time. He was just a great egotistical surgeon. Sure, it makes sense as to why Strange would eventually be a threat, but there's no way for Project Insight to know that at that time. It felt like just a cool way to reference the future Sorcerer Supreme. Shout out! Avengers Endgame was actually going to be a lot longer, but the directors wanted to be nice enough to not have our bladders explode while watching it. Okay, that's not entirely true, but if we're being honest, we feel like Endgame could have been longer just to explain some of its big moments a little better. Take the return from the blip, for example. On screen, it's just as simple as the Hulk putting on the gauntlet and snapping everyone back to life exactly where they blipped away from. Now, although this created a giant moment for everyone arriving to the battlefield to fight Thanos, it raised a lot of questions. Like, what about the people who were in a plane when they disappeared? Or what about the people who were in the middle of a dangerous situation? Did they come back okay? It got so bad that Kevin Feige had to clarify the situation. Thanks, Kev. Agent Phil Coulson was such a fan-favorite character early on in the franchise's run that it made sense for Joss Whedon to kill him off to really twist the knife into the hearts of fans everywhere. If you know Joss Whedon's work, you know he has a knack for that, and story-wise, Coulson's death was used to motivate the Avengers enough to finally assemble and beat Loki. And if he had stayed dead, then that wouldn't have been a problem. But of course, big fans of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. know that death wasn't permanent for Coulson. The character was brought back as a lead for the show, with many people pointing out that this represented a clear lack of stakes. If they were going to bring him back for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., why pretend to kill him off at all? It feels like a cheap moment used to emotionally manipulate fans. Guardians of the Galaxy convinced the world that you could make a movie about a snarky raccoon and a lovable tree. Its style of humor was very different than a lot of other Marvel movies we had seen, and for the most part it all landed. But there was one joke that felt out of place and could have been implemented much better. And of course that's the Howard the Duck cameo at the end of the movie. Although it's funny to see the character back on the big screen again, it's a cameo that doesn't really go anywhere. And Marvel missed a prime opportunity to use the character later in Endgame. Eagle-eyed viewers can spot Howard among the Avengers in the final battle scene, but the Duck doesn't get any special moment for himself, which is 100% a missed opportunity. If you had time for Ant-Man to hotwire a van, then you had time to give Howard the Duck a cool fighting moment. When dealing with different actors on set, it's hard not to wish that you would have cast somebody else. Marvel has had some very high-profile cast replacements over the years, but the first one to raise eyebrows was Don Cheadle replacing Terrence Howard as James Rhodes after the first Iron Man movie. When Howard had been reported as difficult to work with and allegedly being the center of behind-the-scenes drama, to hear it from Howard, the actor says it all actually came down to money. He was contracted to earn a certain amount for Iron Man 2, but allegedly, Marvel changed the deal so they could pay RDJ more money. When Howard refused the amount, Marvel recast him. It caused a significant amount of drama, and you just have to know that Marvel wishes they had hired Don Cheadle as the future War Machine to begin with. Again, a different actor proved to be quite the thorn in Marvel's side, but this time it wasn't a side character like Rhodes that was relatively easy to replace, but rather a leading superhero causing problems. Edward Norton played the Hulk in the Incredible Hulk movie, but was recast by the time the Avengers came around. But seeing Ed Norton and Mark Ruffalo's portrayal of Bruce Banner, you wouldn't see the two as similar characters. They act very different from one another, and even though Thunderbolt Ross jumped from the Incredible Hulk to other MCU films, it really seems like Marvel tried to make audiences forget that the Incredible Hulk happened at all. As much fun as it would be to speculate over what Ed Norton would have done with the character if given the chance to star alongside the other Avengers, we really can't see anyone else filling Mark Ruffalo's large green shoes. Okay, yes, it would have been hard to cast an actor 6 years in advance for a role, but was it hard to decide on the correct shade of purple for Thanos? We met Thanos in the end credits scene for Avengers, and the Mad Titan looks completely different than his later appearances, which of course is due to the fact that Josh Brolin isn't the one playing the character. Stuntman Damian Pache played Thanos for that brief scene, and if Pache was hoping this would lead to future roles as the Mad Titan, well, he was sure in for a disappointment. But even when Brolin was officially cast as Thanos, VFX couldn't seem to decide on how they wanted him to look, as he kept changing his style for each passing appearance before settling on the iconic look we all know from the Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Next time, come to a decision beforehand, Marvel. All of our Thanos action figures look different now. The actual story around the Infinity Gauntlet got so muddled that Thor Ragnarok had to make a joke about it. In the first Thor movie, we see the Infinity Gauntlet in Odin's vault. This was just supposed to be a fun Easter egg as the MCU wasn't as well thought out as it is now. But this eventually created a ton of problems, when Thanos looked like he had on a completely different gauntlet at the end of Avengers Age of Ultron. It led to Hela making a joke about the gauntlet in Ragnarok being a fake and casually pushing it to the side. But of course this isn't the only Infinity Gauntlet mistake Marvel wishes they could correct. In Infinity War, Eitri reveals he only made Thanos the gauntlet because there was no Asgard to protect him. But we already saw Thanos with the gauntlet way before Asgard was destroyed. Silly Marvel, trying to pull a fast one on us. When Thanos was introduced to the MCU, there came an expectation that we would get a comic-accurate motivation. You see, Thanos loves death, like literally. He wants to impress the physical embodiment of death named Lady Death, and it looks like that's what we were getting. In his first appearance, when his minion told him that they would be courting death, Thanos smiled that sexy smile of his. But then it looks like something changed along the way, and Thanos' motivation changed from getting death to fall in love with him to restoring balance to the universe. And we don't know about you, but the whole death thing sounds so much cooler than just trying to balance out the universe, don't you think? Yes, Thanos proved to be a terrifying and compelling villain, but we wish Marvel wouldn't have teased us with his original motivation back in 2012 after the first Avengers movie. We still have trouble accepting Captain America's out-of-character choice at the end of Endgame, but what about you? What do you think is the biggest mistake in the MCU? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to CBR for more awesome MCU content. As always, thanks for watching.